Hi, thanks for watching this video on Johns Island Low Country Flooding Update. This is a video that was first given as a presentation at the Wesley United Methodist Church on August 19th, 2019. About Johns Island, the fourth largest island on the east coast. Here we see it in green. It's a very lush and verdant island, one of the suburbs or sea islands of Charleston, and lies to the southeast of Charleston. Here's another version of it where you can see red and yellow and blue. And the red are the highlands as depicted in LiDAR elevation imagery flown in 2003, and the blue is sea level. So what you can see on Johns Island is this series of these red or high areas that run parallel to the coast. These turn out to be Pleistocene or 100,000-year-old fossil dunes or sand ridges as some people call them. And then they're separated with lower areas in between. And the interdigitation between the water and the land here gives you this real feeling for the intimacy of water and land in the low country of South Carolina. The people that colonized Johns Island and then later inhabited it and lived there, made their lives there dating back from the 1600s, realized this elevation intuitively, and they built their main roads on the high grounds like Maybank Highway and Bohicket Road and farmed the lower areas in between. Notice the airport is also built at the end of what we call the airport dune, and so we have these two basic ridges that run parallel to each other that also parallel the coast. And these are general features of the low country of South Carolina. The city of Charleston has come to Johns Island through annexations beginning in early 1980s. And here you see the outline of what we call the urban growth boundary that will contain the city within that line. There will be no city outside of that line. Although that's not quite exactly true because there have been some deviations to it since it was first drawn. But for the most part, what you see here is that the city owns a lot of land on the Maybank Highway dune, as well as the slopes of that dune and into the lower areas to the south, and also the area along River Road that would be to the west, for the most part, of River Road. And the city of Charleston has had numerous planning exercises since the beginning of the annexations in 1983. There was an update to that original plan in 1995. Johns Island Growth Management Plan in 2007, Johns Island Greenways Plan 2008, Charleston Green Plan 2010, Century 5 Plan 2011. The Century 5 Plan basically subsumes all of the other plans within it and acts as the principal planning and guidance document for the city of Charleston. I served on the Johns Island Growth Management Committee in 2005 to 2007 and helped write that plan. So that represents about 36 years of planning by the city of Charleston for Johns Island. Excerpts from the Johns Island Community Plan, which I think is probably the better document describing the city's thoughts about Johns Island, had its guiding principles to respond and respect the environment, and environmental factors would be of primary importance for planning and for development decisions. And the main recommendations from the Johns Island Community Plan about environmental issues and developments were: 1, do not build developments on land lower than 15 feet. 2, low elevation land is more appropriate for agriculture and forestry, and perhaps very low or ultra low density of housing, maybe 1 house per 2 acres or 1 house per 10 acres. Protecting the tree canopies was very important because that's the character of Johns Island, and the whole governance idea was to preserve the place we know as Johns Island. In other words, to keep the sense of place of this beautiful and historically rich island. So Johns Island building permits didn't seem to acknowledge that, and starting in 2010, there has been an explosion in the issuance of building permits by the city of Charleston. And when I had moved off the island in 2009, and when I moved back in 2017, having thought that my work on the Johns Island Growth Management Plan had sort of help protect Johns Island against overdevelopment, I was blown away by the amount of development that I had seen in the lower areas. As you can see very clearly in this image that was generated by Norm Levine and myself, where we have the satellite imagery of Johns Island, which is taken from Google Earth, superimposed on that LiDAR imagery showing the highlands and the lowlands. And you can see that the area to the north and west of Maybank Highway and that corridor has been heavily developed. And now the development is seeping into the lower areas. And on the same side in the south, we're beginning to see to the southeast of Maybank Highway, it's along the southwest corner, I guess you'd say, of Maybank Highway and Johns Island, there are developments being built, and now that's extended all the way back towards River Road by that first intersection. So explosion of development has occurred irregardless of what was written in the Johns Island Growth Management Plan. As a matter of fact, we are becoming the nation's #1 exhibit of how not to build. This is from Governing Magazine, an article by Mike McCaig, in which he talks about everybody knows it's a bad idea to build new developments on flood-prone land, so why do we keep doing it? Governing Magazine is a magazine that goes out to floodplain managers across the country. This summer, what we have is News 21, which is part of the Cronkite School of Journalism from University of Arizona, came, and the students actually contrasted two communities in America, one that's in danger of forest fires, this is San Diego, and the other one where new developments are in danger of flooding. And this article just came out in August, and it had been out for about 6 hours and already had 85 shares. And it basically, developments in disaster-prone areas mean big bucks for the developers, but the communities are left at risk. The developer comes in, extracts profit from the project, leaves, and all of the associated costs are then spread amongst the population that are left there. This image, which is a little bit fuzzy, is a composite of about 5 different images in which we see elevation in purple, and then we see a mustard color and a yellow color. And those are developments since 1996, so between 1996 and 2008, as gleaned from Google Earth imagery, developments in areas of high elevation on the northern side of Maybank Corridor and in lower elevation on the southern side of Maybank Corridor. And what we can begin to see is that area between the airport dune and the Maybank Highway Corridor, or Maybank Dune, are beginning to fill in with developments. Using the LiDAR imagery and very sophisticated flow path analysis based on topography, fine scale topography, Norm Levine calculated the flow of water, and we produced this map that shows that this area between the two dunes can be actually subdivided into 2 watersheds. Burden Creek Basin is about 5 square miles, and you can see that the watershed extends from in the north from Maybank Highway and all the way down to the south, essentially the southern edge of that airport dune. And rainfall that falls anywhere within this area will exit out of Burden Creek. And what we see are the black houses are existing developments along Maybank Highway dune, and proposed developments, one at the mouth of Burden Creek, now called River Run, it was called Oakville, and then on the Rawl property, which has been permitted for 460 houses, plus industrial space. An acre of forested land will shed about 500 gallons of water in a 1-inch rainstorm. An acre of parking lot will shed 27,000 gallons, almost a half an order of magnitude more. And these developments that are built, called planned unit developments, are much more like parking lots than they are forests. The earth is scraped up, the forest is cut down, the land is filled in with high clay content sand that's virtually impervious, and then houses are built that are slab-on-grade construction on this land that's been elevated. So what we've got here is this impervious land, either present or future, is now going to push more water into the Burden Creek Basin. And the other added benefit we get is in order to preserve the grand trees in these lands that are filled up to building height, is that the grand trees that are supposed to be preserved are preserved in wells. And I call this death by preservation because most of these trees are surface feeders. And their roots are smothered by the fill dirt around their canopies. And then the area just under the canopy that are the wells fill with water and the trees die. And when the trees die, the builders will rip out the trees and put more fill dirt in and plant another house in its place. So death by preservation is a way of actually getting around the idea of caring for at least the grand trees that were part of a forest that once was where there are now houses. So the observed facts and the reality of our climate are now such that we are seeing the increased intensity of rain in storms, stronger and wetter storms and hurricanes, higher tides from increasing sea level, and widespread flooding from developments which have increased the impervious surface area and decreased the ability of the land to absorb water. These are just the realities. And when one looks at this swale area between the two dunes that we have named the Burden Creek Basin, we see that this purple shows all those areas of land that are around 10 feet or lower and that are vulnerable to flooding. So especially if we build an impervious surface plug at the mouth of Burden Creek, the water would back up and would fill these lower areas, and all the people that live there and the houses that are there now are at high risk to flooding. So maybe the best way to not create that situation is to not allow more building that would create that situation in the first place. So because flooding has become a general overall crisis problem in the Low Country, the mayor invited a group of people that are both Americans and Dutch, called the Dutch Dialogues, to come to Charleston with a design workshop to take a look at flooding. And they had a couple of areas that they looked at. One of them was downtown Charleston, another one was West Ashley, and then there was Johns Island. And the overall guiding principles of the Dutch Dialogues are: one, human safety has the highest priority of anything. Second, build with nature. Use nature, don't destroy nature. Respect nature. Respect the force of water. And realize that you can't stop water, but you can maybe rechannel it or remove it or build around it. And also capitalize on natural storm protection rather than having to build very, very expensive storm protection barriers. And the vision of Johns Island that they present is shaped from the identity of the island, where one, we have the topography, these sand ridges or Pleistocene dunes that are as much as 25 feet elevation. Two, we still have an extensive forest canopy. And three, we have soils. And the forests and the soils combine to absorb water. These forests are what we think of as sponge forests. In the summertime, when it's wet and we get intense rainforests, they absorb much of that water. And when it's dry, they slowly release it back into the environment. They also showed a nice cross-section of Johns Island, showing Maybank Dune is the highest, and then there's the Airport Dune, and then there's Apapula Creek, and the Kiowa River, and the Sea Islands of Kiowa and the Atlantic Ocean. So it really gives you this idea of, as we get closer to the ocean, we have the real lower areas, and then we have this Airport Dune, which is sort of the first dune, and then the Maybank Highway. And they also suggested that since Maybank was the highest area, that's where most of the development would occur, and the higher areas generate runoff that would run off into the lower areas. So these lower areas within the Burden Creek Basin should probably be preserved for water storage and to help with the flooding water coming off of these impervious surface developments. Their preliminary ideas that they presented in July were to, one, protect people's lives and property. No housing development should be built in low-lying areas. No slab-on-grade housing should be built in these low areas. Higher elevation developments create runoff, and the lowland forests provide water storage. They also suggested that that outer dune that you see here in this storm surge hazard map that's still white colored, the outer dune is a barrier that would be storm protection. That would be natural storm protection for hurricanes coming across the Atlantic Ocean like they often do, like Hurricane Hugo or Hurricane Floyd or some of these other Cape Verde storms that come across the Atlantic and pick up steam as they do. That dune would form protection for Johns Island and for West Ashley, and in many respects the western flank of Peninsula Charleston. The other dune, Maybank Dune, being the highest, would be a wonderful place to have a storm shelter, right in the very center of that dune. And in fact, as we speak, the very highest ground on that area that's occupied by Berkeley Electric will soon be vacant as Berkeley Electric Co-op builds and moves to another area of Johns Island where they have more space. So that land would become available for a civic center that conceivably could be built along the lines of a hardened storm shelter as well. Because there are many people on this island that are going to be flooded out. There are many people that live on this island and have for generations that don't drive cars or don't have the wherewithal to jump in a car and to drive off the island and evacuate. There will be many people that do not evacuate. So along those lines, we take a look at Johns Island and what's been happening on Johns Island. So we need some new rules. We need to ban this idea of fill and build developments. We need to ban the generation of impervious surface area with these fill and build developments. We need to revisit old building permits that have been dormant for years. The builders go along and pick them up and decide since it's permitted, they want to now build that development. And we have better knowledge now. We have new knowledge about the dangers of building these kinds of development. These could both be done pretty much immediately at the next city council meeting. The next thing is we need to get people out of harm's way. And this is a little bit of a bigger chore, but we do have many developments that were sanctioned by the city on Johns Island, James Island. There are many areas that are built below base flood elevation and that have a historical record of flooding, especially on James Island. And then we need to set about the business of building appropriate storm shelters for the people that are going to be in harm's way when big storms pile up against Johns Island. So to help move this process along, we've started a new Facebook page called the Low Country Flooded States of America. We invite you to leave comments at this page. We will post the latest information. We will post this talk, and we will post many other pieces of information on this webpage. And also, in the spirit of the United States of America and our history, we, the people of the Low Country, in order to live a safer and more sustainable life, demand that the government stop allowing building projects in low-lying areas that flood our homes and destroy our sense of place. Thus far, our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated developments that violate the Johns Island Community Plan, the Century of Charleston 5 Plan, and the findings of the Dutch Dialogues, which all recognize the fragility of our environment, the power of water, and the vulnerability of the Low Country. All of Charleston is historically rich. All of Charleston is threatened by water, and it is time for local, state, and federal governments to exercise their duty to protect the lives and property of its citizens. And we invite you to become signatories to this declaration. We will post it online. We haven't figured out quite yet, but it will soon be posted online. And the original document will be making its rounds to city council meetings and other meetings of public gatherings. Thank you very much. If you would like to contact me, I can be reached at phildustin@gmail.com. Thanks for watching.